Okay, let's first start by looking at why would we ever want to lock our app into a portrait only mode? Why not just go forward and allow for portrait and landscape modes to be supported? It seems beneficial, and that's why iOS allows it. We start by looking at example of the mortgage calculator, a simple application that we went forward and developed. So this is the mortgage calculator that we had developed, and I can just hit the play button once again to make sure we are running the latest code. And yeah, there we go. So we are seeing the mortgage calculator and it looks good, and we have tested this one beforehand. We can actually input data to it and compute, and it will show you the monthly mortgage. Now let's see what happens when we move this to the landscape mode. Well, that doesn't seem pretty. One thing is there's a lot of space from the top. There is a lot of empty space left on the right. The whole body of the screen did not move into the center to realign itself. And I did not implement the scroll view, so it's not really scrolling. Scroll views are anyways going to be needed whether it's portrait or it is landscape. But I think you got the point. It looks good and pretty in the portrait mode, but for making it work in the landscape mode, I need to do some more work. Some of the work can be simple as defining constraints, which we'll talk about auto layout and constraints and stack views a bit later. But other could be that we might want to realign some of these items. For example, this is just too much space. Why have this move in the middle and leave all the space on the left and leave all the space on the right? Maybe the home value and the down payment remains as is, and the mortgage payment comes on the right hand side. And then the same thing happens with the rates. You actually choose a particular value for your loan tenor and your rate is shown on the right hand side. So we can actually readjust the UI, and we can do so for specific screens by using traits, which are like the width and the height traits. There's some aspect pieces to it as well, but you primarily use width and height. We'll come to that later. For now, my UI just works great on portrait, doesn't work on landscape. And I don't want users to have a bad experience, so I'm going to go forward and try and lock it down in the portrait mode. And I've got two options for it. Number one option, which I'm going to showcase, is going to be doing this programmatically. And this one is with the assumption that let's say that you wanted to go forward and have this code get executed and stop the orientation into the portrait mode only for a particular screen. Like say you have a bunch of screens, so some screens really require to support uh, landscape orientation, but there are some screens which you want to lock in the portrait mode. You can do so programmatically by overriding some of the methods in the UI view controller. And the couple of methods which you should be um, focusing on is should auto rotate. You should set it to false. And the other one is supported interface orientations. And you're saying that, okay, the only supported interface orientation is going to be the portrait mode. So let's go forward and see how this will go. So this is a view controller attached to my storyboard, and I want to override a few functions which are present. So I'm going to go forward here and say that should auto rotate, and I'm overriding the boolean to say do not go forward and auto rotate the screen at all. Second one is supported interface orientations. And for this one, I'm going to just point out that, okay, I just want portrait only mode for this particular screens. Let's go forward and hit the play button. Now let's look at it. Okay, so all good. It's coming in portrait mode as early on. I click on it and I turn to the landscape mode, and the UI remains stuck on the portrait mode, which is even if you tilt it, of course the screen will tilt, but means you are just halting, so the screen looks like it's on the x-axis now instead of the y-axis. So that is true, but it remains in the portrait mode. The orientation did not change. You go upside down, you go sideways, it will remain in that particular mode. So that's one easy way of doing that, and that in that manner, programmatically, you can control which view controller, so which screens basically are locked and which screens are not locked. Let's go forward and remove this method for now. Okay, and I'm going to verify that for now I'm able to go back to my BAU behavior. I'm able to see it move to the landscape mode and everything seems to be working fine. Um, Now let's check how we can do it across the app. So for example, I developed an app, but I said, okay, fine. I didn't care about landscape mode at all. I didn't really want to use this excessive landscape. I just want the screens to look, and maybe I don't want to test much. So I did that. Now, if I want to do across the app, then the option which I have here is supported interface orientations. And there are two configurations that you can actually see in your info playlist. One is the supported interface orientation, which is for handsets. The other one is for the tablets, which are the iPads. You expand them and you can choose that for a particular device type, how you want to handle it. For example, you may want to allow portrait only for handsets, but may want to allow the screen to actually rotate and go in the landscape mode for iPad because just the real estate is just massive. So even if you rotate it, it's not that the height of the screen is reducing a lot. The height of the screen is just still big enough for everything to be accommodated, and you may want to allow that. But on the other hand, you may want to allow just for the interface orientation for portraits. Let's go forward and see how we do that. Just hit the minus and remove the interface orientations which are specified for landscape. Now, my code in the view controller still does not have any locks, but it's just setting the for a playlist. I went forward and updated to say that, okay, I support only portrait mode. So I come in here, I see everything good and dandy. I click on the right side. Now again, I am seeing the portrait mode. I go upside down, I see the portrait mode, and I go upside down, I see the portrait mode. Now I can also run this on an iPad if I want to. So I can go forward and choose an iPad Pro, for example, and I can say, okay, how do you look on iPad Pro just for sanity testing purposes? But of course, I have removed the elements here in the landscape mode, so they will not be visible. Now, sometimes people ask me that what if I want to programmatically lock the orientations, but for an entire section, right? Then not a big deal. Instead of doing it inside the view controller, just make sure that for your entire flow, there is a parent view controller. And whatever is your parent view controller, you're just going forward and implementing these override functions for should auto rotate and support interface orientations inside your parent controller, and that's just takes care of the entire flow. Let's quickly look at the iPad here. So I'm seeing the screen, I click on it, it's not letting me to rotate, it's still in the landscape mode, so everything looks good in the iPad orientations as well. Let's just do a command C, and now for iPad I started supporting the landscape mode. So let's see what happens. So now I'm still locked on the portrait mode for my iPad, if you see. But only for iPad, actually, I'm going forward and allowing the landscape mode. So this is a portrait view, okay, on iPad. And on the landscape mode, it auto rotates and it actually lets you see the screen in the landscape mode, but still the screen size was big enough, bigger than an iPhone, so you're pretty much covered. So you will see this happen quite a lot. Many people will lock the orientation only on iPhone, but not on iPad. And that's how you can go forward and lock the orientations for your apps.